All right. Good morning, everyone. Glad to have y'all here, and our guest, Dr. Peterson. So Jeffrey Peterson is the director of the University of Minnesota's Water Resources Center. It's a partnership of the College of Food, Agriculture, and Natural Resource Sciences and University of Minnesota Extension. As director, he provides overall leadership for the center's outreach, teaching, and research activities involving faculty and students across the university. And he holds a faculty appointment as a professor in the Department of Applied Economics. He has earned his PhD from Cornell University in Agriculture and Resource Economics. And prior to coming to Minnesota, he held a faculty position in the Department of Agriculture Economics at Kansas State University for 15 years. He is a recipient of national awards for his research and environmental policy analysis, focusing on water use and water quality impacts from agriculture. He has served as president of the National Institutes for Water Resources and the University Council on Water Resources. So I appreciate you being here, and I'll hand it over to you, and thanks to those that are again attending live and those online. But with that, you bet. The show is yours.
Okay, very good. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm glad to be here. Glad to meet you all. I've enjoyed touring the center here and learning a lot about the cool work that's going on in this in your center. What I thought I would do with this talk is I'm going to divide it into two parts. So first thing I'll do is give you kind of an overview of the Water Resource Center at the University of Minnesota, what we do, how our work is organized, and all of that. Maybe to talk about, just for you to have that background, to talk about what might be different or similar about some of the way you're organized and the work you do, and maybe have a chance to, create some conversation about what we could learn from each other, or even collaborate going forward. And then in the second part, I'm going to focus in on one of the issues that we're working on in our center and at the university that's kind of similar to what your focus is, but in a different geographic setting. Some of the groundwater irrigation management challenges we have up there in the state of Minnesota. A lot of people don't even realize we have irrigation in Minnesota, but we do have some, and so I'll talk about that a little bit. And again, the setting is different. There's maybe some commonalities with what you do, but we can talk about what we might be able to learn from each other. So, first part. So, the Water Resources Center at the University of Minnesota is part of this national network of water resource centers and institutes. So we're a peer of the Mississippi Water Resources Research Institute, so I know Jason well through that. There are 54 such centers and institutes across the nation, one in every state, plus a District of Columbia, and as you see, some of the territories there. The history of it goes back to the 1960s. So in 1964, the Federal Water Resources Research Act was passed and signed into law, and it set up this network of centers that provided federal funding for a water center research center or institute to be created in every state. Typically, although not in all cases, they're at the land grant institution. And federal funds are required to be matched with non-federal funds. So that could come from university allocations or other sources. And the purpose of each center is to address the water issues that are relevant and important in that state through research, extension, engagement, outreach, and training future students. So that has a lot in common. It makes sense that they're at land grant institutions with that kind of mission. So we're organized, the association of these institutes is National Institutes for Water Resources, and then what we all have in common is our federal funding comes to us through the Water Resources Research Act program administered by USGS. So we have that federal connection too. That was way back in 1964. So in 2024, we actually celebrated the 60th anniversary of that network. Which means that we've got 60 years of history here about how all these different centers have evolved and changed. They all look a little bit different depending on which state you're in and in the institutional context. The way we're organized at Minnesota, this is what I call our highly simplified org chart. The way we're organized is that we report to both the College of Food Ag, Natural Resource Sciences, and University of Minnesota Extension, which is basically organized like its own college within the university. So there's a dean of extension, a dean of CFANS. I report to both of them. They also provide base funding then to support the center. I've been director since 2015. And when I got there, the center didn't actually have a strategic plan. So that was one of the first things that I worked on. And we set up a strategic plan. As I talked about, we identified sort of these 5 focus areas that kind of organize our work. Then that plan had like a 5-year life. It was meant to be in force from 2018 to 2023, so it expired last year. We updated the strategic plan, and this is the most recent set of vision, mission statements, and core values. I think it's probably pretty similar. If we did actually look at mission statements from other water centers and institutes in the network, and the language is probably pretty similar to what you find in other states. Mission is to address current and emerging water challenges through collaborative research, education, and engagement in Minnesota and even beyond. So if you want to see more about that, it's all posted on the website. So that's a little bit about sort of who we are, how we're organized, how we see ourselves in the world. Now for a few slides, I can talk about what we actually do and how our work plays out day to day. And one way to answer this question is to answer it sort of by function. So I'll go back to that tripartite mission of the land-grant university. We'll start with research. The way we work on research is, I always say we work on both sides of the ledger there. So for a lot of the research activity that's on our books, we act as the sponsor. So through some of the USGS funds are passed through to research projects, some of our internal funding from the college. We also distribute to like seed projects to faculty members. We have a state appropriation that goes to do stormwater research on urban stormwater. Again, we release an RFP, people apply for that, we have a process and hand out various projects that we manage. And then on the other side of the ledger, we work also as an applicant, or at least collaborate to be an applicant. So we try to assemble teams of researchers, usually interdisciplinary teams, to go after larger scale grants from different sponsors, federal, mostly federal, sometimes state, and have had a string of projects like that over the years. And then on what's labeled engagement, but really here I'm including all the extension work, outreach, everything like that. So we have a total staff in the Water Resources Center is 26 right now. About a third of the staff are extension educators. So on the extension side, all the extension educators who work on water issues, they call themselves the Water Extension Water Program Team, is housed within our center, and they're stationed. We have one of the educators who's stationed in our office in the St. Paul campus. The rest of them are distributed all throughout the state doing programming on various topics. And then we also have some professional training programs. So the biggest one is called the On-Site Sewage Treatment Program in the state of Minnesota. I think other states are like this too. If you want to be an installer of septic systems or an inspector of septic systems who works like for a county government or anything, you have to be certified by the state. Requires passing an exam and all that stuff. That's handled by our state, what's basically our state EPA, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. What our program does is provides training so that people have all the knowledge they need to pass the certification exam. And then there's some post-certification credits that we offer. So that kind of program is self-sustaining. People pay pay a fee to be part of the training, and that revenue from that pays our educators. So there's another 6 or so of our staff who work on that program. And then another thing that fits in this bucket is we sponsor different types of events. The stormwater program has a seminar series. We have folks working on soil health. They have a conference called the Soil Management Summit that was just a week or so ago. And the biggest single one that we sponsor is called the Minnesota Water Resources Conference, related to all things related to water, held in the fall every year. About 900 or so people have come to that. So that's probably our most visible single event in the whole state, I would say. Then turning to education, our main role here, you don't have, we're not a degree granting unit within the university, so we don't have our own programs that we own, but we do, we are the administrative home, it's called, for this interdisciplinary graduate program called Water Resources Science. So there's a lot of faculty who are affiliated with that from, I think there's like 30 different academic departments that are represented in that program. So it's really interdisciplinary. It wouldn't fit necessarily in just one academic department. So we serve as the administrative home, staff are in our department. There's about 60 or so students in that program. It's one of the few programs. University of Minnesota, you may or may not know, is a statewide system. The Twin Cities campus, by far the largest one. Second largest campus is in Duluth. And there's actually quite a lot of expertise at Duluth in water science, and a number, about more than half actually, of the WRS students are on the Duluth campus. It's one of the few graduate programs that cuts across one of them. That's kind of a unique feature of it. And then another thing we do is fund and sponsor and organize student professional development activities. And of course, through our research, and we make a deliberate effort at this to provide training opportunities for students when we create grants. So when we have all these RFPs and things, there's student training that's built into those. We funded a number of students that way. And then, okay, so research, extension engagement, and education. That covers, I guess, mainly the tripartite mission of the land grant university, and even what's written into the Water Resources Research Act. And that's probably a complete description of like most of the academic departments within land grant university. But as an interdisciplinary center, I feel like we have, that doesn't quite fully describe what we do, because we have what I uncreatively labeled the fourth function, which is kind of to serve, to integrate across different departments, to create a place where their collaborative ideas can sort of germinate, to be an entry point into the university ecosystem from the outside, all these things. So connecting, communicating, integrating. So there's a number of things that we do that fit in that kind of fourth bucket. We host symposia, we have these newsletters that we send out to our campus community, but also our stakeholders all around the state, social media presence, all those kinds of things. If you're interested in following any of those, I'll have links here in a little bit. Okay, and then in our first strategic plan, one of the issues is that we're, as in any state, the water issues statewide are numerous and varied and complex. There's also a lot of actors working on various water issues. And at the University of Minnesota, even though we're a sizable center, we have a lot, we're not really the only game in town either. There's other there's other program centers and institutes who have a lot of water expertise. There's something called the St. Anthony Falls Hydraulics Laboratory, which has a long history and has worked a lot on hydrology over the years. In Duluth, there's something called the Natural Resources Research Institute. We also have a Sea Grant program. There's others. Anyway, so one of the things we tried to do in our strategic plan is really kind of focus in, narrow down on what is it that we want to focus on, where we have the most expertise to offer. and be clear about that to ourselves and to our stakeholders so that they know where we can contribute and how we can collaborate with others. So after a lot of kind of reflection on that and self-discussion, what we realized is that our sort of home base for our expertise in the Water Resources Center lives in this intersection of land, water, and people. And so kind of what we mean by that is we really focus on not maybe the whole universe of water problems, but the subset of water problems that are really tightly connected to land use and land use decisions, individual decision makers who are distributed across the landscape. And then, of course, people, because you often do have distributed decision makers of all kinds, like with non-point source pollution problems, classic example of that. But of course, the impacts of all these problems affect people in different ways in different communities. So that kind of distinguishes us. And so we don't really focus on a lot of like the urban piped infrastructure kind of questions. That's really, there's a strong presence in civil engineering working on that. We don't really focus on, for example, the Great Lakes, Lake Superior. There's something called the Large Lakes Observatory up at Duluth that's focused on the Great Lakes. So it allows us to distinguish and just refer people if they have questions about those to others. But for our focus areas within that intersection, we identified these 5 focus areas where we do our work. So one of them is urban stormwater, which I mentioned a couple of times. Ag and water and agricultural landscapes, that's always been a focus of the center. By the college that we work with, it's kind of obvious that would be a focus area of ours, and we do have a long-standing presence there. Plenty of issues to work on, as probably everybody in this room knows. Decentralized wastewater is another term for septic systems, and because of the training program we have there, we have a presence, but they also do research in this area. And then drinking water is another area. That one has kind of emerged since the time, it's been an issue forever, but our work on it has kind of grown since in the last 10 years since I've been there. And then, of course, we have a lot of lakes in Minnesota, and lakes and aquatic ecosystems is another area. So, and then I won't belabor this, but in the most recent version of the strategic plan, we realized too that those focus areas, which talk more about kind of subject matters areas, don't kind of fully describe the work, at least not of everybody at the center, because we have people like myself and others who are social scientists who do work, who have expertise in that area, but their work kind of cuts across all of those different, or at least could cut across all those different focus areas. So we have these kind of cross-cutting expertise areas that cut across those, and is another way for people to, if we label those, it's another way for people to understand what we contribute. So that's an overview of us, the Water Resources Center. I'm happy to, I guess I could pause now to see if there's any questions. This is the ways you can connect with us if you are interested in any way. Yes, Jason.
Hey, could you speak a little bit more in depth about your water resources science program, the degree program?
Yeah. So it's technically all graduate programs at the University of Minnesota, the way it's set up, are not owned by a department, even though departments sometimes think that. It's technically, they're a list of faculty members who work in a given area, and they're faculty led. So the leadership of the Water Resources Science program is led by the director. There's actually 2 directors of graduate studies in their case, because there's one on the Twin Cities campus and one on the Duluth campus. And they set the curriculum. There's governance boards and things drawn from the WRS faculty. They offer both MS and PhD degrees. The curriculum is actually pretty flexible. There's different tracks that you can pick, but there's really only a few core courses that everybody in WRS has to take. There's like a water policy class. There's a research, I think it's research ethics, actually. It's not just our program that has that. And a seminar class. I think those are the only requirements that everybody has to take. And then the other classes you take depend on your major professor, the track you want to take, and even within tracks, there's a fair bit of flexibility. On the Twin Cities campus, almost everybody who's a WRS graduate faculty is a double or triple citizen. So meaning that they're also a graduate faculty in like what they think of as a departmental program. And that is one of the issues, honestly, that we face is for individual faculty, what's the reason they would, and they're going to hire a student or want to take on a new student? What's the reason that they would want them to be in WRS versus their home program? And a lot of times the response to that is the student's interests and the kind of career path they want to take afterwards. So we do have a number of graduates who, have their PhDs and do the academic track or like faculty or scientists. But we have a number of them who work for agencies or who are even private sector or the nonprofit sector, things like that. So it gives them a bit of a broader training. Is that going in the direction you're interested in?
Yeah, well, I guess in my mind, I'm trying to think, because you said no one department necessarily owns it, but if I'm a graduate student that's interested in the program, do I come to you as the director and say I'm interested in this? And that's where the path starts?
Yeah, there's like the WRS program has its own web presence. They have a coordinator that works for that program and the directors of graduate studies. So very often the entry point is through the WRS program coordinator or through, they send an inquiry that way. And then they get referred to faculty. Or sometimes it goes like a prospective student reaches out to an individual faculty member and then they have a discussion about programs and things like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jeff, can you do a quick comment on the process over the last 10 years and where you were with the two kind of competing entities and coming together into a unified mission, et cetera, and organization?
Yeah, sure. So I was telling Nico about that when I was hired in 2015. One of the specific tasks I had was to make the center a more unified organization, because predating that, going back to give you a very succinct history, the center in its current name was created in the 1990s by a merger of two predecessor centers. Okay, and so it did have this single name. Nominally, it was one center, but the predecessor centers were each led by their own directors. They then became co-directors of the Water Resources Center. And even though it had one name, the way it functioned, if you looked under the hood, was kind of two centers under one umbrella, right? And as it happened, both of those respective co-directors were working their way toward retirement just before the position I came into was announced. And the deans at the time looked at that and they said, well, maybe now is the right opportunity to change the leadership structure. So we have a single co-director. There's an associate director that reports to me, who reports to the director. And then a lot of what I worked on was making sure that we created one kind of unified organization. We all saw ourselves doing the same thing and had more integration. There was one co-director that mostly worked on the extension stuff and another one that mostly worked on the research stuff. We've done a lot of work to try to integrate across those. That kept me busy for a while. But it's still a challenge. I mean, organization of any size, there's always the issue of people working in one program. It just takes ongoing effort to make sure other people know what others are doing and finding ways to collaborate and like that. And I maybe should have mentioned, full disclosure, that so I started the director job in 2015. This is now my 10th year, and this is my last year in that position. I'm rotating back to a faculty
You
position.
made so much money now that you just want to.
No, I'm ready for retirement. But I mean, I've honestly enjoyed the job tremendously, still do. It's been a great opportunity. But it's just that I have a lot of interests on the research side of things that I just never had time to focus on as director. I want to get back to that. So. Anyway, am I running us out of time here? Okay, I guess we're about halfway through. Should we move on? Maybe this is to part two. So this is like one of the topics within ag and rural watersheds that we're focusing on. There's a lot of water quality. There's water quality issues, ag drainage, a number of things. But the one I thought that might be of most interest to you all is what we're doing with irrigation and groundwater management. And I guess maybe I'll start to frame this. This was oh shoot, I forgot to put I meant to put the web link for how you can find that graph. I'll add that later. I show this map to people in Minnesota, they are very alarmed. This was based on a study that was done in I think it was completed in 2014 or 2015, using satellite data. I don't know if you've heard of the GRACE satellites. Yeah, so that it track terrestrial storage of water over time. And it's I don't know how long of a deep of a history, but it's a several decade history of data, so you could identify trends and things. And this was a study that was looking at terrestrial storage changes in the continental United States. So probably everybody here knows, but we're talking about terrestrial storage. We of course include aquifers, everything stored as groundwater, but also all the water stored in layers above that, and even in the soil profile and living matter on the landscape. And in Minnesota, of course, we pay attention to all the various surface water bodies. It would include all that. And you can see here, so this is identifying trends. The brown colors are a decrease in terrestrial storage over time. And then there's some of the major aquifers that are outlined. So you guys are here. And maybe it doesn't entirely surprise people, some of the places where we were seeing declines. But what really alarms people in Minnesota is this spot up here, centered right in Minnesota, where you can see a little bit of it. It's not a steep trend, but you know, but nevertheless declining over time. And what is going on with that, people want to know. It should be said that that's less than a centimeter per year rate of decline in all terrestrial storage. And it's stuff, and we can't pick that up really in like groundwater levels or anything. They look pretty stable, but it's also, there's a lot of interannual variability, so it'd be hard to identify a trend like that. But if you look at, this is a graph showing water use. It should be more properly labeled water withdrawal, but I'm thinking about that kind of stuff. That was put together by our state DNR. Numbers might be hard to see, but the series goes from 1985 all the way up to 2023 is the most recent year that was compiled. This does not include electric power generation, so by far the largest amount of volume of withdrawals go to cooling for water, thermoelectric power generation, but almost all of that is return flow to the water course. There's almost no consumptive use to that. Some of these other uses do have, depends on which one you're looking at, but there is consumptive use going on here. Water supply, that should probably be, that's the municipal water supply. And the trend hasn't really changed that much, especially, it did kind of peak in about 2006 or so. Industrial processing hasn't changed much. This other is a mix of stuff, really hasn't much of a trend. You can see irrigation, if you look at it, there is an upward trend going there. And particularly these last few, these were drought years. So 2021 was a major drought, and 2022 and 2023 were also pretty dry. So we'll come back to that too. So maybe one place to start here with a background is to talk about how water law works in Minnesota. It's labeled, I guess, usually as a modified riparian state. So the rights are riparian, meaning that if you have land with access to water, you can in principle use water. But it's not pure riparian in the sense that, you know, that's it, you have access to water, use it, no questions asked. In Minnesota, you have to get a permit from the State Department of Natural Resources. And if you're applying for a permit, part of the permitting process is the DNR has to review it to make sure that the use you're proposing doesn't impair the ability of existing permittees to access water. So you can't be too close to an existing well or whatever. And then there are requirements for permittees. You have to report your water use annually. It's self-reported, but you have to install a meter, and then you're required to report. And then you do pay fees. They're not large fees, but it's like on a graduated scale. And if you use more water than what your permit says, there's an additional fee for that. But again, it's not so expensive that, like in a drought year, and it's a question of, are you going to save your crop or overuse your permit? You'll overuse your permit and pay the fee. That's almost what happens. And okay, so this is a map of all the irrigation permits in Minnesota. The pink ones are for non-crop irrigation. So you see the Twin Cities Metro here. This is irrigation for like golf courses and other green spaces and stuff. The green ones are the crop irrigation. And you can see that they're all kind of clustered there in the middle of the state. So that's the area we're gonna focus on. One reason why that is just simply has to do with groundwater availability. So these are what are called the groundwater provinces. So provinces 1, 2, and 3 here have groundwater available both from bedrock aquifers as well as more shallow, the unconsolidated material above that. For various reasons, we don't actually have much irrigation there. It's not needed as much, and it's even not feasible here in Province 3 because of the hilly terrain. Provinces 5 and 6, actually, groundwater is basically not available, at least not at the capacity you need for irrigation. But it is available in province number 4 from these shallow, not bedrock aquifers, but relatively shallow, sort of near surface sandy aquifers. So this region has the name the Central Sands in Minnesota for that reason. So not only are the those shallow aquifers made up of these kind of sand and gravel type material, but the soils are also pretty light textured, coarse textured soils. And what that means is that this is a map of travel time from the surface through the near surface materials into aquifers. So it makes it really vulnerable to contamination from pollutants put on the surface. So one of the issues here immediately is that if you're going to use groundwater from that area and you're growing crops where there's nutrients applied to crops and things, there's a question of how much of those nutrients are working their way into the aquifer, and that can happen pretty easily and quickly. And then the other thing I should mention too is that this is kind of we'll call it a delicate system, because these shallow, sandy, gravelly aquifers are connected to numerous surface water features in the region. So there's streams, lakes, wetlands, all those things. So nutrients can also work their way into there. The other thing that's going on in that region, which is kind of interesting, is that it's basically the transition zone. It's like the northern frontier of cropland area. So you can see that in this map, like the orange and yellow colors are all cropland, the green is forest land. This map was from 2013, but if I had more years on here and I showed you like a time lapse, it might be hard to see. But what you would see gradually is that there's more and more cropland working its way into this transition zone. And almost all of the new crop, so a lot of people don't know this either, but in Minnesota, because of this area right here, we have one of the highest rates of deforestation in North America. So a lot of the land that's converted from forest into agriculture is irrigated because of the coarse textured soils. Even after, a short time after a rain event, the crops will be water stressed, right? So you almost need to irrigate to keep those going. It turns out the most profitable crops, at least under irrigation there, are corn, some soybean, and potato. Potato's interesting because it does well for the kind of potatoes that they're looking for these days in these coarse textured soils, really soft, it's constricted because of clay and stuff. You can grow a potato that has a really nice rounded convex shape. It's oblong. It makes the ideal French fry when you run it through, so that really, and it has a uniform color. So the beautiful French fries that McDonald's want to serve, that's exactly the kind of conditions you want. So what kind of management challenges does this lead to? Well, quite a few. As I kind of mentioned, you have to irrigate basically to profitably grow crops in that part of the world. Corn and potato especially are going to be sensitive to water stress. If you stress the potato plants, they won't grow the right shape of potato and the right size. You won't get the grade you want. Corn, your yields are going to suffer a lot. And because of the coarse textured soils, you need to irrigate even between a short time after a precipitation event. But if you're not careful, so you need to irrigate to keep the crops healthy, but if you overdo it even a little bit, put on a little bit too much water, there's problems with that. Because you're going to be in those coarse textured soils, you'll be driving nutrients that are in the soil profile down to deeper layers. They can quickly reach the aquifer and contaminate it. Of course, you're pushing nutrients down that should have been, that were intended for crops in the first place, so the plants don't have access to those. And we do see increased nitrate concentration in some of the domestic wells in that area. That's been clearly documented over the last several years. That's a public health concern. And then some of those nutrients, if the shallow aquifer is loaded up with nutrients and they're connected with surface water, you can transport nutrients into those. And then all of this is even more complicated and has a new set of problems in drought years. So, again, to keep the crops going, farmers have to irrigate and they pump even more. But if you're pumping more, you're going to draw down the aquifer, at least temporarily during that season. In Minnesota, the aquifer levels always typically do recover in the winter when we get precipitation, snow melt going back. Or infiltrating down, but in the drought during the summer, that drawdown is going to reduce stream flow. It's going to reduce lake levels. That can have thermal impacts on it affects stream temperature and ecosystems that way. And then there's wetlands that are sensitive if they're desiccated, or even more than they would be. That's another problem. So a lot of problems to work on here, and we have, I guess, Drew's counterpart, our irrigation extension specialist, Vasu Sharma, was hired a few years after I started, in 2019 or something like that. And she's been doing a lot of great work to try to address some of these issues. And producers are, of course, aware of some of this stuff. A part of it is education. And then on the research side of things, there's a lot of work that's going on to try to address it. So maybe thematically at least kind of similar to some of the work you all are doing. Basu and others are trying to develop and evaluate various irrigation technologies, precision technologies. Water and nutrients have to be managed simultaneously in these systems. So there's a lot of work on like fertigation and all that. So water stress monitoring, but also monitoring nutrients. And then agronomic management, ways to improve these systems, make them more efficient with existing crops. Educating producers on all of these different recent advances, but also the management, that's kind of the trade-offs of different approaches they might take. They're working, I was talking to Nico and Drew and others about their work on developing, like you all have a master irrigator program to educate producers in that way. Those of us who are economists and work on the, social science, policy, economics kind of side of things are really interested in knowing what are the factors that are actually driving farmers are going to adopt new technologies, new practices. Why do they do that? What are the impacts of that? And to understand that, you could understand how that could be altered or what effect policies are having. And then even looking longer term, right now, corn and potato are the most profitable things to grow because of the nature of those crops and the way they're stressed and how they need to be managed. That leads to all these other problems. Maybe there's other kind of crops that could be developed that would be profitable in the future that wouldn't have these kind of problems. So there's this is thinking very long term, but there is a lot of research on developing alternative crops. Or maybe combining other crops into rotation, like winter crops and things that might address some of this. And then this is more me as an economist, not thinking ahead, but I'm going to have more time to do research. Again, thinking longer term, you could even back up another step and say, well, why was it that these long-term research investments were made in corn and potato and other crops like that? That caused them to be developed. It didn't used to be the case that we had the corn varieties. You couldn't grow them at that latitude. The growing season was too short. But now we've got shorter season varieties that can handle that kind of thing. There was a huge investment of research to make that happen. What were the forces driving that? The incentives? What other set of incentives might create space to invest in other kind of cropping systems? So that's my background on that. Way more questions than answers, you can see. But I'm happy to have a discussion or address anything that you have. Or maybe one of the things I was wondering for you all is maybe what kind of commonalities, differences do you see, or maybe ideas that we haven't thought of. But maybe we're out of time. Is that true?
No, you're fine.
Okay.
I'm on our side.
Okay, all right, we have a little time. Great.
So do you had it showed increase in irrigation, looked like also increase in ag land too, right? Deforestation and adding new land into agriculture. Is that trend future? I mean, looking in past now and going forward, is that going to continue? Do you think? Is it going to just keep getting worse and worse, or however you want to say?
Yeah, that is a great question, Drew, and that's another thing that I want to look into to see if we can understand better these trends and what's driving that. But just from what I see so far, I don't see the forces that are driving it is that there's with potato, these shorter season varieties of corn that can be grown profitably. The most economically profitable use of the land in that region, if you compare it to forest on those sandy soils, it's just more profitable to convert it to farmland. And there, unless commodity prices change or policies change, it seems like those forces are there, and that's going to be a continued pressure. Um, so, I mean, at some point, there's a northern frontier where it won't work anymore. Yeah,
Shifting gears slightly, and I'm asking from your just years of experience in there, because I see where y'all's institute is. You clearly have agriculture going on, but you're also apparently looking into drinking water and on-site wastewater. So, from my experience with where we are in Mississippi, a lot of our drinking water and on-site wastewater people come out of either an ag background or an engineering background.
Yeah.
Are you seeing the same thing up there? Because I don't ever find anybody in college that says, hey, I want to go work in wastewater, or I want to go work in drinking water. They're
Right.
typically doing something else, but we need them to do drinking water, wastewater, so they end up working on that. What do y'all find?
Yeah, I think that's been pretty similar. And what I'm seeing, maybe something similar to you, is that there's a little bit of a mismatch in like the kinds of like labor market demand versus majors and training and things like that. So there's a
Yeah.
huge demand, for example, for wastewater treatment plant operators, especially in rural communities.
Yeah.
People with expertise in drinking water treatment, things like that. And a lot of them do, I guess they would hire them from an engineering background sometimes, or an ag. But I don't think there's many students, the 18-year-olds who are starting, don't know that that's like a path and an opportunity, and there's just a huge need there. And then we've got like we do have folks in ag, like a very broad term, but like conservation professionals, I would say. That some of them work for soil water conservation districts, and NRCS, and state agencies, and even nonprofits and things. They have a need, at least in Minnesota. This might be different for us, but they have a really strong need because the places where, from a water quality standpoint, we need to address the problem is ag. The land use is agriculture. And it means you need to interact with producers and things to talk about conservation with them. And a lot of the undergraduate students who are interested in like natural resources and things like the natural pipeline into conservation is not through the ag sciences necessarily, it's through the natural resource sciences, and they don't necessarily have the background. And there's a lot of education about agriculture that needs to be done for early career professionals in conservation. It's been my observation anyway. That might be a little bit different.
No. I don't think it's any different from Mississippi, because from my vein, we see a lot of interest or need in the drinking water, wastewater arena.
Yeah.
Yet nobody in college is really teaching it. Our
Yeah.
civil engineering gets close when they talk about wastewater treatment. But,
Right.
but
it's just one part of one class, isn't it, or
correct.
something?
That's what I'm saying. And,
Yeah,
and that's
yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So,
And it's an interesting place for our, be great to talk more about this for us anyway. It's a little bit of a challenge because we have no direct role in undergraduate education. And, we're connected to faculty and I know departments well, but when it comes down to it, where do I have influence? I can just talk to people, but maybe there's other things we could do though. So, something I can tell the next director to work on.
So far for that central sands region, what kind of irrigation technologies and management have farms been adopting so far?
Right, so in terms of irrigation delivery, the center pivot system is pretty common. And what the main thing that we're working on with is more A little bit on precision irrigation that's being adopted a little bit, but it's expensive and it takes a lot of management. But more like irrigation scheduling is another, is one that's like a first step to get farmers to adopt. There's some irrigation scheduling tools that, Vasu is helping train people on. And then the more, progressive folks who, are looking at the simultaneous water and nutrient management, so irrigation type systems, even with precision systems. I think that would be, and there's also some work on, how cover cropping and tillage affects water use and all that stuff. There's a lot of research on that experimentation. One of the issues with irrigation scheduling even is that because historically irrigation was not common in that part of the world, we don't have even like the crop coefficients to give you the estimated ET for, the growth profile during the season. So they're working on refining those to make sure we have it.
Any other
Anyone
questions?
online?
Or online? Thank you. A small token of our appreciation. Got a bag of goodies.
Oh, thank you. How
Take
nice.
out.
Great.
Thank you for presenting and the time and spending around today. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It was nice. And the recording will be available on the NCAR website shortly.
Oh, good.